This is E&P Audio, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing.
Welcome back for a patriotic new episode of E&P Reports, the official podcast from the staff of Editor and Publisher Magazine. I'm your host, Bob Andelman. This week, we bring you another fresh conversation with an industry leader and challenge you to once more look at news publishing with fresh eyes. But first, I just want to thank everyone who joined us during our first 2 months of podcasting, as our numbers doubled in both audio and video. I suspect there are even some people who are watching or listening to E&P Reports without knowing that E&P is journalism shorthand for editor and publisher. An editor and publisher is the more than 100-year-old industry magazine from which this show sprang. Please consider checking out our website at editorandpublisher.com and subscribing to our daily emailed newsletter for the latest industry headlines and breaking news alerts. Today, Zack Baddorf, co-founder and executive director of Military Veterans in Journalism, a nonprofit association that advocates, you know what I meant, for veterans in the newsroom, and he talks to editor and publisher managing editor Evelyn Mateos. Baddorf shares what the organization is all about, the resources it provides, and why the news publishing industry could use the voice and perspectives of veterans. Learn more about military veterans in journalism when the interview is done at www.mvj.network. That's M as in military, V as in veteran, and J as in journalism, .network. So mvj.network. And now, here's Evelyn.
Tell us, what is the connection between military veterans and journalism?
Well, I guess I could start with a little story about myself and how I got into journalism. So I was in the Navy from 2001 to 2006. And so when I served, I was what they call a JO in the Navy, which is a journalist. And so that's an enlisted person who does stories about the military for the military. And so I was based in Japan for 2 years, traveled all over Asia, and then I was also based on a ship based out of San Diego. And so I put together a great portfolio. I got my bachelor's degree in journalism. And, when I decided that, one enlistment was enough, I was going to get out of the military and go into the quote unquote civilian world. And then, so I did. And I got out and I thought, okay, I'm going to be all set to go for, to become a journalist, build my career as a civilian. But unfortunately, it was a lot tougher than I expected. I applied for dozens of jobs across the country, and I didn't really know what I was doing aside from that. I didn't really have any responses. There were basically no people that got back to me, and so it was discouraging. And the problem was that I didn't have any mentors. Nobody was really guiding me along in the process of, and I didn't really know what I was doing, frankly. So it's not a sad story. In the end, I ended up doing a lot of freelance work. I've worked all over the world as a freelancer for the New York Times, Associated Press. My stuff has been published by Washington Post and all sorts of outlets. I'm very proud of what I've done since then, and I've done a lot of journalism, and I've been able to focus on a lot of stories that I think are really important and powerful. And so with that being said, I and another veteran who's also in journalism, he works for CBS in New York, we both noticed that we both went through some of these challenges, and we thought maybe there's something we can do to sort of help others, our brothers and sisters getting out of the military, who also are going through these sort of struggles as they try to break into this challenging field of media. And we thought, well, we have learned a few things over the years. Let's start a nonprofit. Let's try to help each other, the other veterans out. And so we've done that. As of May of this year, we formed Military Veterans in Journalism. And you can learn more about us at mvj.network on the web. So that's www.mvj.network. And so basically what we are is a nonprofit organization focused on one primary mission, which is to get more veterans into journalism, into America's newsrooms. And there's a number of reasons why we believe that's important.
So where do you start? You have this goal, this idea, let's put this organization together to help these veterans that want to break into media. Where do you begin to build something like that?
Well, it's all online. The community of military veterans in journalism is small, and that's part of the problem, actually. We looked at the census data. There's roughly 2,000 Americans who are in the media who are post 9/11 veterans, and so that represents roughly 1.1% of media workers across the country. And so across the United States, all Americans, roughly 7% have served in the armed forces. And of those, about 2.5% are post 9/11 veterans. So we are vastly underrepresented as post 9/11 veterans in journalism. And we thought that was a problem. Now, we also recognize that it's a small community, and we also recognize that journalism is a tough field to break into. So we thought, well, there's these small numbers, and we just started reaching out and trying to find people, and we launched in May, and we spread a little video on social media, and we have about 115 members at the moment. And so what we did is we created a few lines of effort, programmatic efforts. So we have a mentorship program where we connect veterans with people who have been in the field for a while, and we also have a program upcoming in the spring. It's a workshop that will be in New York City, bringing together 9 veterans from across the country, flying them into New York, where they'll meet a variety of top journalists and meet some HR people from various media outlets, as well as have the opportunity to shadow some of these journalists who have been in the field for a while. And finally, we're working on developing internships and fellowships with a variety of media outlets, specifically intended to create opportunities for these veterans to get in the door. And one of the important things that we think is for these internships and fellowships is to have them be a livable wage. Because I remember when I got out of the military, I basically had no money, and I couldn't have afforded to do an internship or in New York or DC, where life is very expensive. And so we want to make sure that veterans have the opportunity to go and get the chance to work in media organizations, even if that means that they're not paid great, but they can survive and build up their portfolio, make those connections, and develop the sort of careers that they want.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, it is a small group. Do you think maybe it's because it doesn't really cross a veteran's mind that this is a career that they can take?
That's an interesting question. I've thought about that. I think sometimes there's a little bit of fear on the behalf of some veterans of the military, of the media. There's also sort of an antagonistic relationship sometimes as well. It's sort of seen as somebody who's maybe coming after us. I think that's because some people in the military don't necessarily have much experience with the media, or it's the way that it's portrayed. And so that lack of interaction, I think, can create that sort of perception. But I also, I think that I know a lot of veterans want to get into this field. It's just a challenging one as well. We haven't, frankly, done too much research on it's tough to reach out to find out how many people actually want to get into the field. But we know that we have a good chunk of our members who are, some of them have gone and graduated through master's programs in journalism at Columbia, for example. Others are going through tech schools like the New York Film Academy. Others are, they blog, or they've written, and it's just something that they want to pursue and see if it's something that ultimately they want to do as a career. So we have a variety of members at different points in their lives, and we're basically creating opportunities for them to learn more about the field, create connections, and hopefully land them a job.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, from what I can tell, as you're mentioning, there's a little bit of something for everyone. Like I know there's resources for freelancers, right, to get in touch with different editors. Could you talk a little bit more about, the resources that are offered?
For sure. So we try to tailor our website and the resources we provide to military veterans to think about if, we basically think back to our experiences when we were getting out of the military. What was it that was missing? And so one of those things is, as a freelancer, it's tough to make those connections to the editors who are going to commission pieces. And so we've created a freelancer network that connects editors to freelancers who happen to be veterans, and also vice versa, connect the veterans directly to the editors. And so in addition to that, the mentorship program, of course, is another great way to make those connections that can hopefully lead to jobs. And we also have a number of blogs about, how to clean up your resume, make it journalistic specific, different career tips. And we hope to really explore some of those things at the workshop we've got in the spring as well.
Great. So now I know, switching gears a little bit, we hear so much about diversity in the newsroom, right? And that's gender diversity, race diversity, because we want different perspectives. What unique perspectives or stories can military veterans tell us?
Yeah, that's a really important question because it is a question of diversity. And military veterans are underrepresented in newsrooms. And I think, for me, a big part of it is the fact that we've been at war now for 18 some years. More than 7,000 Americans have died in these wars. Another 50,000 have been wounded, and we've spent trillions of dollars on them as well. So it's an important part of our public life. It's an important thing that we should discuss. And there are very qualified journalists out there who are doing this who are not veterans. But I think it's important that veterans who have served in these wars, who know firsthand the experiences, they bring a certain level of nuance and understanding and technical expertise that is not possible unless you've served. It's not a necessary thing that everybody who reports about the military have served in the military, but it certainly helps.
Right, definitely. So any other unique attributes that you want to shout out that, veterans can bring to journalism? I know you were just speaking to, the type of techniques that they're going to use, their knowledge. Any other things you want to shout out?
Yeah, I think more broadly, if we think about the sort of people who are in the military, generally what I've found it's a very large community, so it's not every single person, but most of them are service oriented in some form or another. And that means that, and I see journalism as another form of service as well. I think it's a public service. I think it's important to our society. And I think that's something that military veterans bring, and they bring dedication. And they bring that sense of duty and justice. And I think there's probably a perception that, and I've encountered this before, that a military veteran is going to be subservient, that they're going to be focused on just one side, not thinking outside the box, just following chain of command, and that's it. And it's true that military veterans are good at working in offices and they're good team players. But I think, in fact, most veterans I know, many of them are opposed to these wars. And many of them are going to bring that skepticism and that neutrality and that sort of questioning way of thinking that is really important to journalism. And so I think it brings a different perspective, and it also brings the sort of values that I think are really useful in newsrooms as well.
It's interesting that you mentioned, journalism as another form of duty. I really feel it is, I agree with you there. And it's interesting that more veterans, I guess, don't, like we were talking about earlier, kind of have it on the radar. A lot of the times I hear, people come back kind of getting into another line of service. I'm sure, as we all know, law enforcement, firefighters. So I feel like it kind of should be on the radar, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, when I got out of the military, I knew I wanted to do something good for the world. And I know that I'm not going to be ending world poverty, or I'm not going to be president. These are not the sort of things. I'm not aiming for something huge. But I know that in my journalistic work, for example, I have done stories that have made impact. Now, sometimes that means that one person whose story I told felt empowered, like their voice was heard. Other times, it's led to policy changes. And there's been real tangible things that, for example, in Syria, that I know that my stories have contributed to making the world a little bit better for people in tough situations. So now, it's tough. Sometimes the media field is a tough one to see the work. Sometimes I feel I'm back working for the government now, doing public affairs work. So sometimes I've gone back and I want to be in the government, involved in trying to push for change from the inside. And other times I feel like it's important to be an outside voice, trying to push decision makers to make the sort of change that I want to see in the world. So I think it really varies. But I think one for sure is that it is a way to serve, and people find a lot of joy and pride in the work that they do in journalism.
So now, having yourself gone that path from military to journalism, what advice do you have for veterans that are trying to break into the media field?
Yeah, I would say that it's critically important to develop a portfolio, to show that you can write, and whether that means writing for your own blog that you create, and then working your way up to specific trade publications that might, for example, focus on the military, like Cask and Purpose, military.com, Military Times, trying to find a way to demonstrate that you know how to technically achieve what newspapers and news outlets are looking for, what they require in their offices is an important step. Internships, as much as, I remember when I got out of the military, I also didn't want to do internships. I thought, well, I've been doing this. I know how to do this sort of work, and I've led troops. And I thought, this is a downgrade, but it's something that I think we have to admit and that is necessary to get that experience. And so an internship is another important step if you can't get a full-time job right away. I would also say building up a strong web and social media presence is important, showing that you know how to communicate about yourself. Again, it's all coming back to storytelling. Can you tell the stories that you'll need to do when you're working in journalism? And so you need to be able to tell your own story first. Those are some of the main things. And finally, and I think this is something that I neglected to do when I got out of the military. I've learned over the years that building a strong network and asking for help is also important. I think, again, that comes back to a pride thing, that we can't succeed on our own. We need to ask for help and say, hey, I'm struggling here. I'm having a tough time making a break into this field. I really don't know what the next steps are. What should I be doing? Who should I be talking to? And people, I think generally people in this field, in all fields generally, I think people want to help when they can. And though if you just ask for it, if you reach out, if you have conversations, have some coffee, then it really helps to build those connections in that network.
Well, that's great advice for anyone trying to break into the media field. So, especially on that internship thing, I know how tough it is. We all do.
Yeah.
So, now switching gears again a little bit. I know, just starting in May, I know last time we spoke, there's quite a few things that military veterans in journalism would like to see one day for themselves. So what are those things? Would you like to speak to any of that? What is the hope for military veterans in journalism?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have our first workshop coming up in the spring, and we're fundraising for that. So for anybody listening or watching, we are still looking for funders, and we would love to hear from you if you have any ideas or know an organization or a corporation or foundation that might fund us. So we're doing that in the spring, and that's really exciting. That'll be our first real event where we focus on imparting some knowledge and really connecting people with a lot of strong journalists as well as HR officials. So I'm looking forward to that. As I mentioned also, our next step is really focusing on internships and fellowships. They're a little bit more expensive because, again, we want to pay a livable wage for these things. So that means, again, more fundraising. And we also think that it's important for newsrooms to invest in military veterans and recruiting them. And, obviously that's self-interested, but we think that it's, when you want to attract and find a diverse population for your newsroom, for your staff, it requires time and it requires money. And so we're trying to connect with a variety of news outlets to see if they will make that investment. And we're there to help facilitate it. We're an all volunteer staff. Nobody is making any money off of this. All the money that we raise is going to go directly to the programming, and paying for logistics and things like that. So it's a passion project for us, and those are our achievable goals. I could see it expanding to be even more workshops each year. Certainly, we're going to do one in DC at some point, and other cities. Perhaps LA and San Francisco. But for now, we're opening a lot of doors. We're talking to foundations, talking to big media outlets, talking to potential funders. We're reaching out a lot, and we're just getting started. And another call for help. We could use some help on all these things. So again, if anybody has any ideas, feel free to reach out to us.
Great. And so would you like to do a quick little shout out to how easy it is for veterans to get involved and where everyone can find you once more?
For sure. So the website is www.mvj.network. You can also find us on Twitter @MVJ Network and on Facebook, facebook.com/MVJ Network. And I think we're also on Instagram, so you can find us there too. We're excited to be involved in this effort. It's a real labor of love, and but it's really important for me to try to support my fellow veterans as they make that next step in their careers, and we're excited to see where it goes.
Great. Thank you so much, Zack, for joining us on E&P Reports.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyn. That wraps up this week's edition of E&P Reports, the official podcast of Editor and Publisher Magazine. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Please share it with a friend or with your social media contacts, and subscribe in YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you watch or listen to your favorite podcasts. And if you'd like to rate and review the show, well, we'd sure appreciate that, too. I'm your irrepressible host, Bob Andelman, saying thanks for watching, thanks for listening. And please consider checking out my other podcast, Mr. Media Interviews, now in its 13th year at mrmedia.com. That's mrmedia.com. Let's talk, edit, and publish again next week.
This is E&P Audio, a service of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing.